Hi everyone, it's Rosemary and welcome back to the Mind of the Writer. If you were watching the groundwork laying videos that I posted a few weeks ago, you will remember that I said that part of this process on this channel was that I was going to argue both sides of my theories and my points. The reason being that when you're an author and you are writing a fictional story, you are responsible for jumping into these fictional skins of characters who are in opposition with one another. And if you are believing what you are writing and you are believing yourself when you're in that character, you need to believe your opinions in order to make those opinions real for the person reading at the other end. And so with that in mind, with the theory that a writer has to believe and feel what they're writing, and with the understanding that you have to jump around into these different opinions, I am going to argue the opposite of what I presented last week in that more graphic video about writers having active imaginations and restless minds, which would prevent them from being rooted in the present moment and mindful and connected to the now, which is something that is promoted as so important in today's world. I mean, it was probably important before as well, but it's something that we're hearing a lot about. And I think we've heard a lot about it since the publication of Eckhart Tolle's book, The Power of Now. So if you'll remember, in last week's video, I presented you with a chair and I said that the writer would very quickly be able to picture that chair in the past, and then even before that, when it was a tree in the forest, that the writer would be able to picture that tree in the future, and even beyond that, when it turned into firewood and was going up in flames. And today I'm going to say that, you know, a writer would be able to come up with all sorts of fictional scenarios around that chair, which would make it very difficult for the writer to just be very peacefully focused on the chair and in the present moment. But in today's video, I'm going to say the opposite. So in order for the writer to be able to imagine, to be able to picture the chair in the past, and then when it was a tree in the forest, and in the future, and then when it's burning as firewood, the writer would have to be very focused on the present moment, very connected to the now, and disconnected from the chaos going on around them, and also disconnected from the mental clutter in their mind. So for me, when I'm writing, in order to write, before I get into that space that we could call the zone, I have to be in a meditative state. And I have to be very disconnected from what's happening around me in my house. I have to not be worried about all of the household tasks. And I have to have almost a blank space inside of myself, and I need to go into that blank space. And once I am in that meditative state, after a while, the characters will start to show up, the story will start to materialize, the ideas will start to come, the conversations will start to, take place in my ear, and I get into a state where I am almost recording what I am seeing and I am recording what I'm hearing. And I would not be able to do that if I wasn't completely at peace in the present moment, in the now, in order to transcend time periods and receive whatever is coming to me. So that is very, very different from the writer having a very restless mind and active imagination and being a victim of those things. I also think that it's important to note, to go back to the video before that, on that dynamic of the child being able to disconnect from domestic reality to escape stress. If you have been in that situation for most of your life, being able to disconnect from domestic reality would be quite easy. It would be a skill that you had honed over time. How healthy that skill is would depend. My argument would be that if from a very early age you learn to harness that into creativity, into creating art, that you would have, that maybe it wouldn't be so unhealthy. But being able to disconnect from whatever's happening around you and from your own mental clutter and go into that very meditative state, I would say is very, very necessary for a writer in order for the story to come. So this is a fairly short video this week, but I wanted to state that these two schools of thought, the writer as being, I should say, victim to their imagination, victim to the active restless mind, and the writer as being in the zone and able to transcend while they're in the zone. Those two theories or those two schools are going to be really important when we start to look at some of the behaviors that writers exhibit when they're writing fiction and when they're creating fantasy worlds. So I really want you to keep these two schools of thought in mind. And just to repeat, the writer as a victim of their active imagination, their active mind, and the writer as being able to get into that zone, into that meditative space, into the present moment in order for all of the epiphanies and characters and images to come through and to come to them. So we'll continue this next week, but that's my argument for this week, that writers definitely do need to be in the present in order for their wonderful fictional worlds to come through. So we'll see you next week on The Mind of the Writer.